The wind came from the north, and it had no mercy. June kept her eyes on the cracked stone path ahead, one foot in front of the other, her worn leather boots splitting at the left sole so that every other step pressed cold earth directly against her skin. The gray wool cloak she wore had once belonged to someone larger. It dragged along the mud at the hem, collecting dark water and dead leaves, but it was the only thing standing between her and the biting autumn air that cut through the hills like a blade. Her right arm hung at a wrong angle. She hadn't looked at it since the morning. Looking made the nausea worse, and she couldn't afford nausea. Not now. The bone had broken 2 days ago, and though she had bound it tightly against her ribs with a strip of linen torn from her underdress, every step sent a dull, pulsing fire up through her shoulder and into the base of her neck. She breathed through it. She had learned, a long time ago, how to breathe through pain. Against her chest, held in place by a wide band of cloth wrapped around her torso and her good left arm, her daughter slept. Mara was 8 months old. She had her mother's pale blonde hair, barely more than soft wisps against a round, rosy head, and she slept the way only very young children can sleep. With total and absolute trust, her small fist curled beneath her chin, her breathing slow and even against June's collarbone. She weighed almost nothing. She was everything. Just the next hill, June told herself. Just the next hill, and then you can rest. She had been telling herself that for 2 days. The territory road stretched ahead through open highland, flat and gray under a heavy autumn sky. To either side, yellowed grass bent under the wind, and in the distance, dark pine forests climbed the slopes of the mountains. The road itself was rarely traveled. Most wolves from the eastern packs used the valley routes, wider and better kept, which was precisely why June had chosen it. She could not afford to be seen. Not by anyone who might recognize the silver mark of House Draven on the torn edge of her cloak, and not by anyone who might carry word back to him. Her former mate. Former. She had to keep reminding herself of the word, because the rejection still sat inside her chest like a shard of something that hadn't finished breaking. 5 weeks ago, Aldrich had stood in the great hall of the Draven Pack Keep, in front of every elder and warrior who served under him, and he had spoken the words clearly and without hesitation. I, Aldrich of House Draven, Beta of the Eastern Ridge Pack, reject you, June of No House, as my mate and partner. The bond is severed. You are no longer under my protection or the protection of this pack. He hadn't looked at her once while he said it. She had been holding Mara when he did it. The baby had been fussing, pulling at the linen edge of June's dress, and June had been trying to quiet her with a soft pat. And then the words had landed like stones dropped from a great height, and the room had gone completely silent, except for the sound of the fire in the hearth and Mara's small, uncertain murmur. No longer under my protection. That was what mattered, in the end. Not the bond. Not 5 years of shared nights and whispered promises, and the quiet, ordinary life she had built from nothing. What mattered, legally and by pack law, was that without a mate's protection, an Omega had no standing. No roof. No claim to food or shelter from the pack stores. She could appeal to the Alpha. She had tried. But Aldrich was the Alpha's cousin, and the Alpha had looked at her across his carved oak desk with an expression that was not cruelty, but something worse. Indifference. You have 2 weeks to leave the territory, he had said. The child may stay, if you surrender custody. She had left the next morning. She hadn't slept since, not truly. She had walked north because north was the only direction that didn't belong to anyone who knew Aldrich's name. She had carried Mara and what she could fit in a single cloth sack, a change of clothes for the baby, a small knife, 3 hard rolls of bread now long eaten, a water skin, and a single copper coin that wouldn't buy her more than a cup of broth at the next village, if she ever reached one. The arm had broken on the second night, when she had slipped on a wet bank descending a hill in the dark. She had twisted to shield Mara from the fall, and taken the impact on her own forearm against a root. The snap had been loud and clean, like a branch giving way. Mara had cried for 10 minutes. June had not cried at all. Now, midway up the long highland road, the wind picked up sharply. The gray cloak snapped around her legs. Mara stirred, made a small unhappy sound, and June shifted her hold instinctively, using her left arm to press the baby closer, careful not to jostle her right. One more hill. She crested the rise and stopped. Below her, on the wide flat where the Highland Road met the ancient stone crossroads, there were riders. Not ordinary riders. There were 12 of them, and they sat atop war horses that were larger and darker than anything she had ever seen in the Eastern Territories. Animals with thick necks and black coats, the kind bred for endurance and intimidation rather than speed. The men wore leather armor reinforced with dark iron at the shoulders, and over their chests hung a sigil she recognized immediately, even at this distance. The wolf crown, the royal crest. Her stomach dropped. The King's Road Guard. They were not supposed to be on this route. The Highland Crossing was a minor road, barely maintained, used by traders and wanderers. The King's men traveled the Valley Highway. Everyone knew that. Everyone relied on it. She took one step backward, instinctively, but the movement caught the attention of the rider at the head of the group. He turned his horse slightly, scanning the ridge above the crossroads, and even from this distance she could feel the weight of his gaze like a hand pressed flat against her chest. He was not wearing a guard's helmet. He wore no helmet at all. His dark hair was braided back from his face, and he sat in the saddle the way mountains sit on the earth, as though the possibility of being moved had simply never occurred to him. His fur-lined cloak was black, clasped at one shoulder with iron, and across his chest, the leather straps of his armor caught the gray afternoon light. June had never seen the Alpha King in person. She had heard enough stories to know, without a single doubt, that she was looking at him now. She should have turned. She should have walked back the way she came, taken the long route around, done anything except stand at the top of that hill with her broken arm and her sleeping baby wrapped against her chest, completely visible against the pale gray sky. But her legs had stopped working. Because across the distance, across the wind and the yellowed grass and the cold autumn air, the Alpha King's gaze had found her, and he had not looked away. He raised one hand, and every rider behind him went still. Then slowly, he turned his horse toward the hill. June's first instinct was to run. Her second instinct, the one that won, was that she couldn't. Not with a broken arm, not with Mara against her chest, not on a Highland road with nowhere to go, but open grass on either side. Running from the Alpha King's guard would mark her as a fugitive, and a fugitive Omega with a child had no legal protection under any pack law in the known territories. They could take Mara. They had every right to. So she stood. She pressed her left hand flat against her daughter's back, feeling the small warmth of her, the steady rise and fall of her breathing, and she made herself look forward as the King's horse climbed the hill toward her. The animal was enormous up close. Its hooves struck the stone path with a weight that she could feel through the soles of her boots. The black coat was glossy despite the cold, and the horse's breath came in great white plumes in the autumn air. The man on its back said nothing for a long moment. He studied her the way she imagined he studied maps before a campaign, with patience, and without any visible emotion. Up close, the Alpha King was younger than the stories had suggested, though there was nothing young about the way he held himself. His jaw was sharp beneath a short dark beard, and his eyes were a startling pale gray, the color of ice over deep water. A thin scar ran from the edge of his left cheekbone toward his ear, old and well-healed. He looked at her arm first, then at the cloth wrapped around her torso, and the small shape within it, then at her face. "Where are you going?" he asked. His voice was low and even. No performance in it, no deliberate intimidation, which somehow made it more unsettling than if he had shouted. "North," June said. Her own voice came out steadier than she expected, though she could feel her pulse in her broken arm. "North is a direction," he said, "not a destination." She said nothing. He tilted his head very slightly. "You're an Omega." It was not a question. He could smell it, the same way any Alpha could, the particular scent that marked her rank, soft and pale as winter wood smoke, nothing like the sharp iron smell of a beta or the deep amber warmth of an Alpha. She had spent years trying not to think about what her scent told strangers. It told them too much. "Yes," she said. "Unprotected." "Yes." His gaze moved back to her arm. The linen binding had soaked through at the outer edge. She hadn't noticed until now. And a thin, dark line of dried blood had seeped through the fabric just below her elbow. She watched him look at it. She watched something shift, briefly, behind those gray eyes, though she couldn't name what it was. "How long?" he asked. 2 days. A muscle in his jaw moved. He looked at her the way she had seen healers look at things they were calculating, not with sympathy exactly, but with a kind of focused assessment that was its own form of attention. Behind him, at the base of the hill, she was aware of his guard waiting in absolute stillness. 12 men on 12 dark horses, all of them watching this exchange without a sound. Mara chose that moment to wake up. It happened the way it always did. A small sound first, a breath that changed rhythm, and then a soft, questioning noise that was not quite a cry, but was the beginning of one. June shifted instinctively, adjusting the cloth wrap to bring the baby higher, closer to her warmth, and the movement sent a white bolt of pain up her broken arm that she could not entirely suppress. She exhaled sharply through her teeth. The Alpha King dismounted. He did it without announcement, without asking permission, swinging down from the saddle in one smooth motion and handing the reins to a guard who had appeared, silently, at the horse's left side. June took an involuntary step backward, and he stopped immediately, 2 full arms' lengths away, and held both hands open at his sides. It was such a deliberate, careful gesture that it startled her more than if he had advanced. "I'm not going to take the child," he said quietly. June blinked. Her throat tightened. She hadn't realized how clearly that fear had been written on her face. "I need you to let one of my healers look at that arm," he continued, in the same level tone. "If the bone has been displaced for 2 days without proper setting, you will lose the use of it." "I don't have coin for a healer." "I didn't ask if you had coin." She stared at him. He met her gaze without blinking, without any shift in his expression, and the sheer stillness of him was disorienting. She was used to men who filled silences with their own importance. This man simply waited. Mara made another sound, louder now, and June reached up with her left hand to touch her daughter's cheek. The baby turned her face toward the warmth, eyes blinking open, pale gray-blue in the cold light, round and serious. She looked at the stranger in front of her with the frank, unhurried curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid. Something passed over the Alpha King's face. It was brief, barely a second, and June almost missed it. But she had spent years watching people carefully, reading the small tells that warned her when a mood was shifting, and she caught it. Something in him had moved, looking at Mara. Something had flickered and been quickly, deliberately closed away. "What is the child's name?" he asked. It was not the question she had expected. "Mara," she said after a moment. He nodded once, as though filing it away somewhere careful. "My camp is 1/2 mile east," he said. "There is a fire, a healer, and food. You don't have to speak to anyone but the healer if you don't want to. You can leave when your arm has been treated." He paused. "No one will touch the child." June looked at him. She looked at the open, waiting stillness of his hands, the absence of threat in his stance, the thin, cold scar on his cheekbone. She thought about the last man who had made her promises in a steady voice. "Why?" she asked. He seemed to consider the question honestly, which surprised her. "Because you're standing on a highland road in October with a broken arm and a nursing child," he said, "and the nearest village is 11 miles north. And because—" He stopped, looked at Mara once more, briefly. "Because no one should have to carry that alone." Mara reached out her small fist toward the gray air, opening and closing her fingers at nothing in particular, the way babies do when they are testing the world. June looked at her daughter's hand, then she looked back at the Alpha King. 1/2 mile east, she repeated. "Yes." She exhaled. The wind moved through the highland grass around them, bending the pale stalks flat, and the cold settled deeper into her broken arm. And she was so tired, more tired than she had ever been in her life, down to the marrow of her bones. "All right," she said quietly. He did not smile. He did not look triumphant or satisfied. He simply turned and walked back to his horse, and the guard at the base of the hill shifted to form a path, and no one spoke, and the only sound was the wind and Mara's soft, wondering breath against June's neck. June followed. She didn't know why she trusted him. She only knew that her arm was broken, and her daughter was hungry, and the Alpha King had asked for her child's name before he asked for anything else. That had to mean something. She just didn't know yet what. The camp was not what she had expected. She had imagined something military and cold. Rows of identical tents, guards standing at rigid attention, the smell of iron and horse sweat and unwashed wool. What she found instead was a wide clearing, sheltered on 3 sides by ancient pines, their trunks thick as wagon wheels, their roots humping up through the dark earth like old bones. 3 large tents had been raised in a loose triangle around a central fire that burned steady and low despite the wind, fed by pine logs that crackled and threw amber light across the clearing. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat reached her before she crossed the tree line, and her stomach responded with a hollow, embarrassing urgency she did her best to ignore. A woman met them at the edge of the camp. She was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair pinned back beneath a dark hood and the kind of face that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. She carried a worn leather satchel over one arm and looked at June with sharp, assessing eyes that moved immediately to the bound arm. "Sit her by the fire," the woman said, to no one in particular, and then directly to June. "I'm Senna. I've been setting bones since before you were born. I'm going to look at that arm, and I need you to tell me honestly how much it hurts on a scale of bad to catastrophic." "Somewhere in the middle," June said. Senna made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Honest. Good. Come." She was guided, not pushed, not led by the arm, just walked alongside, to a low wooden stool near the fire. Someone had spread a dark fur across it, and the heat from the flames reached her immediately, pressing against the front of her cloak like a warm hand. June sat down carefully, adjusting Mara in her wrap, and the baby made a content sound at the sudden warmth, pressing her face deeper into June's chest. Senna knelt in front of her without ceremony and began to unwrap the linen binding with practiced, gentle fingers. June looked away. She looked at the camp instead, at the guards who moved around the perimeter with the quiet efficiency of men who had done this 100 times, at the horses tethered to a long pine rope strung between 2 trees, at the stacked supply crates near the largest tent. Ordinary, purposeful, nothing threatening in it, and yet her body remained coiled tight, waiting. The Alpha King stood at the far edge of the firelight. He was speaking with a man she hadn't noticed before, tall and lean, with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of angular face that was naturally arranged into suspicion. This man wore the same royal guard armor, but with a different mark at the shoulder, and he was speaking in a low, urgent voice with his head inclined toward the king, glancing at June with barely concealed disapproval. She was too far away to hear the words, but she understood the shape of the conversation. "Why did you bring her here? She's an Omega with no pack, no name, no standing. You don't know where she came from or what she's carrying." The Alpha King listened without interrupting. Then he said something short, and the lean man's jaw tightened, and he said nothing more. "Look at me," Senna said quietly. "Don't watch them. Watch me." June turned back. The healer had finished unwrapping the arm and was holding it with both hands, fingers moving with careful precision along the line of the break. The skin around it had gone dark purple and yellow, swollen tight over the bone, and the sight of it made June's vision waver slightly. "Clean break," Senna said, without any drama in her voice. "You didn't displace it when you fell, which means you're lucky or you know how to fall. The binding kept it mostly true." She reached into her satchel and withdrew a thin wooden splint and a roll of clean white cloth. "This is going to hurt. I won't lie to you about that." but it will hurt for about 30 seconds, and then significantly less than it has for the past 2 days. All right, June said. Do you want something to bite on? No. Senna looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was not pity but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who knew what it meant to have decided not to be soft anymore. Hold the baby still, she said, and set the bone. June made no sound. She pressed her left hand flat against Mara's back and she breathed. One long exhale through her nose, and the white fire moved through her arm, and then, as Senna had promised, began to recede into a deep, contained throb that was almost manageable by comparison. Mara had not stirred. Senna worked quickly, binding the splint firm and clean, wrapping the white cloth in smooth, even layers. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at June with those sharp eyes. When did you last eat? She asked. Yesterday morning. A pause. And the child is nursing? Yes. Senna stood, reached into her satchel, and produced a small wrapped parcel of dense bread and dried meat without any further comment. She set it on June's knee and walked away toward the supply crates, already calling for someone to bring broth. June looked at the food. Her hands were shaking slightly. The aftermath of the bone setting, she told herself. Only that. And she unwrapped the cloth carefully and ate with the deliberate, controlled focus of someone who had learned that eating too fast after hunger only made things worse. The fire crackled. Pine resin hissed where sap met flame. The smell of roasting meat deepened, and somewhere behind her one of the horses blew a long breath through its nose. She was aware, without looking, of the moment the Alpha King crossed the clearing toward her. She heard his boots on the pine needles. She heard the particular quality of stillness that moved with him, the way conversations quieted at the edge of his presence, without anyone making a visible effort to quiet them. He stopped a respectful distance away and crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. It was, again, such a deliberate physical consideration that it unsettled her. "How is the arm?" he asked. "Better," she said honestly. "Your healer is skilled." Senna trained under the pack healers of the Northern Reach for 20 years. He glanced at Mara, who had finally woken properly, and was now looking around the firelit clearing with wide, interested eyes. "She's hungry," he said, with the same matter-of-fact certainty he applied to everything else. "She's always hungry," June said. And then, because something in his tone had been so straightforward that it bypassed her defenses, "She'll be fine until I—" She stopped. There was nowhere to finish that sentence that didn't reveal how little she had. He didn't press it. He looked at the fire for a moment instead. "My man Rowan," he said, with a slight inclination of his head toward the lean, skeptical guard, "is going to tell me that bringing you into this camp was a poor decision." "Was it?" June asked. "He thinks so." A pause. "Rowan thinks most of my decisions are poor ones. He is, unfortunately, right often enough that I keep him close." It was so unexpectedly dry that June almost smiled. She caught herself. She wasn't ready to smile at him. She didn't know enough yet. "What is your name?" he asked. "June." "June." He said it as though testing the weight of it. "Which pack?" She was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted, sending a shower of small sparks upward into the dark pine canopy above them, and the wind moved through the branches with a low, hollow sound. "None," she said. "Not anymore." He looked at her then, directly, fully, with those pale gray eyes that she was beginning to understand never missed anything. "How long have you been walking?" he asked. 4 days. She watched him absorb that. She watched him look at her broken arm, at Mara's small face turned toward the firelight, at the worn and mud-hemmed cloak, at the single cloth sack that held everything she owned in the world. And she watched his expression do something very controlled and very deliberate, settle into a careful neutrality that, she realized, was not indifference at all. It was anger, quiet, contained, but unmistakable once she knew how to read him. He was angry, not at her. Before she could examine that further, Rowan appeared at the king's shoulder, leaning down with an expression that had moved past disapproval into something harder. "My lord," he said, in a voice clearly designed to carry only to the two of them. "We have a problem." The Alpha King did not look at him immediately. He held June's gaze for one more second, and something passed between them that she could not name. A question, maybe, or the beginning of one. Then he rose, and turned, and followed Rowan into the shadow of the largest tent, and the firelight swallowed the space where he had been. June looked down at Mara. Her daughter had one fist closed around the edge of June's cloak, holding on with that absolute, instinctive grip of the very young, and she was watching the fire with serious, wondering eyes. "I know," June thought. "I don't understand it either." The problem, as it turned out, had a name. June learned this not from the Alpha King directly, but from the way the camp changed in the hour that followed. The quiet efficiency she had observed on arrival shifted into something tighter. Guards moved with more purpose. Voices dropped lower, and twice she saw riders dispatched into the dark tree line at a pace that suggested urgency rather than routine patrol. Senna returned with a bowl of thick broth and sat beside her without being asked, in the way of someone who had decided that company was required whether or not it had been requested. "Drink that," she said, nodding at the bowl. "All of it." June drank. The broth was salted and rich with bone marrow, and it reached the cold hollow in her chest and began, slowly, to fill it. Mara had been fed, and was now drowsing again in the wrap, one cheek pressed warm against June's collarbone. The splinted arm still throbbed, but the edge had been taken off, replaced by a deep, manageable ache that June could breathe around without effort. "What's happening?" she asked Senna quietly. The healer glanced toward the large tent where the king and Rowan had disappeared. A third man had joined them, broader than Rowan, with a warrior's build and a fresh cut above his brow that had been hastily bound with cloth. "Word came in from the southern road," Senna said after a moment. "A pack crossed the border checkpoint at Greyvale without clearance, armed." She paused. "Draven pack." The broth went cold in June's hands. She kept her expression still. She had learned that, too, how to receive terrible information without letting it reach her face, because faces were the first thing people read when they were deciding how much power they had over you. "How many?" she asked. Senna looked at her sharply. "You know that name." "Everyone knows that name," June said carefully. The healer studied her for a long moment with those experienced eyes, and June could feel the assessment moving behind them, the silent arithmetic of a woman who had seen enough to add things up quickly. 12 riders," Senna said finally. "Armed for territory, not travel. They're not passing through." She picked up the empty broth bowl without ceremony. "I'd stay close to the fire tonight if I were you." She left before June could ask anything else. June sat very still. Aldrich. She didn't know it was him, couldn't know, not yet, but the certainty sat in her stomach like cold iron. 12 riders, Draven pack, armed. Coming from the south, the same direction she had fled from. The timing had the shape of pursuit rather than coincidence. "He doesn't want her back," a voice in her mind said, flat and clear. "He rejected her. He has no legal claim." But Mara, the Alpha, had offered to let her stay if she surrendered the child. And Aldrich was the Alpha's cousin, which meant that if the Alpha had changed his mind, if he had decided that an Omega carrying a Draven bloodline child was a loose thread that needed to be tied off, she stood up. She was not going to sit by a fire and wait. She had taken 3 steps toward the tree line when a voice stopped her. "Where are you going?" It was not the Alpha King. It was Rowan, standing at the edge of the tent's shadow, arms crossed, watching her with an expression that combined suspicion and something that might, in better light, have been mistaken for concern. "I need to leave," June said. "You need to sit down," he said. "The Highland Road North is being watched." She stopped, By whom? By us, he said, as of 20 minutes ago. He looked at her with that angular, assessing face and said nothing else for a moment. Then, "You're from Draven territory." It wasn't a question any more than the king's had been. These men read the world the same way, she realized. In facts, not assumptions. "I was," she said, "and the riders who crossed at Greyvale." "I don't know," she said. "I don't know if it's connected." "It would be a remarkable coincidence if it wasn't," Rowan said, in a tone that suggested he did not believe in remarkable coincidences. He looked at Mara, asleep against her chest. His expression did not soften exactly, but something in it shifted. A fractional adjustment. Like a door opening an inch and then stopping. "The king wants to speak with you," he said. "I gathered," June said. Rowan looked at her for another moment. Then he turned and walked toward the large tent, and she followed, because there was nothing else to do. The road was watched, the trees were dark, and Mara was warm and sleeping, and June had run out of directions that felt safe. The inside of the tent was lit by 2 iron braziers that threw steady orange light across a wide map table at the center. The map spread across it was enormous, the entire Northern Territory, marked with pack borders in dark ink, with routes traced in red and blue that she didn't know how to read. Rolled documents were weighted at the corners by smooth river stones. The Alpha King stood at the far side of the table. He had removed his fur-lined cloak and stood in his leather armor and bracers, and in the brazier light the scar on his cheekbone was more visible. It had the particular shape of a mark given by something other than a blade. He looked up when she entered. "Sit," he said, and there were 2 chairs near the brazier. She sat in the nearer one, and Rowan took the far edge of the tent, and the Alpha King came around the table and sat across from her, not behind the desk, not in a position of authority over the map, but level with her, close enough that she could see the details of his face clearly in the firelight. "The riders at Greyvale," he said. "Tell me what you know about Draven Pack." June looked at him. "Why would I know anything?" "Because you walked 4 days through Highland in October with a broken arm to get away from something," he said. "And the Draven Pack followed the same road you came from. And because—" He paused, and his gray eyes held hers with that same uncomfortable directness. "You went pale when Senna mentioned the name." June was quiet for a long moment. The brazier crackled. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant water. She thought about lying. She was good at it. Or she had been once, before she had learned that lies were just a slower way of being trapped. "I was mated to Aldrich of House Draven," she said. "He rejected me 5 weeks ago. The Pack Alpha gave me 2 weeks to leave the territory." She kept her voice even. "I was given a choice to stay if I surrendered my daughter." Silence. Rowan, in the corner, made a sound low in his throat that was not quite a word. The Alpha King's expression did not change. But there it was again. That contained, deliberate stillness that she had begun to understand was not calm at all. "And the riders," he said. "I don't know why they're here," she said honestly. "Aldrich doesn't want me, but Mara carries Draven blood, and the Pack Alpha." She stopped, pressed her hand against her daughter's back. "I think someone decided she's an asset, or a liability. I'm not sure which is worse." "Neither," the Alpha King said. "Both mean the same thing for the child." The bluntness of it landed like a stone in still water, and June felt the ripples move through her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was exactly what she had been thinking for 4 days and had not allowed herself to say out loud. He leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on his knees. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer it honestly." "All right," she said. "Are you afraid of them, or are you afraid of going back?" June looked at him. No one had ever separated those 2 things before. "Both," she said after a moment. "But going back—" She looked down at Mara's sleeping face. "Going back means she grows up knowing her worth was negotiable. And I would rather walk every road in the known territory than let that be the first thing she learns." The tent was very quiet. Rowan shifted in the corner. When June glanced at him, the suspicion in his face had changed into something she hadn't expected at all. It looked faintly like respect. The Alpha King sat back. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not the calculation of before, not the careful neutrality. Something quieter. Something that had the texture of a decision being made. "You'll stay in this camp tonight," he said, "under royal protection. The riders at Greyvale cannot cross onto King's Road territory without written clearance, and they don't have it." He paused. "In the morning, we talk about what comes next." "You don't know me," June said quietly. "You don't owe me anything." "No," he agreed. She waited for him to say more. He didn't. And somehow that single word, unadorned, offered without justification or performance, was more reassuring than anything else he could have said. She looked at the map on the table, at the borders drawn in dark ink, the routes traced in red, at the vast, complex territory that a single man was responsible for holding together. She looked at him. "What is your name?" she asked. "Not your title. Your name." Something shifted in his face, brief, almost surprised. "Valen," he said. June nodded. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and the fire in the brazier breathed orange light across the map. And somewhere in the dark, beyond the camp, 12 riders from Draven territory were waiting for morning. But inside the tent, for the first time in 4 days, June felt the knot in her chest loosen, just slightly, just enough. And Mara slept on, warm and unknowing, in the space between her mother's heartbeat and the world. Morning came gray and cold, the kind that settles into the bones before the eyes are fully open. June woke to the smell of pine smoke and the sound of boots on frozen earth outside the tent Senna had assigned her, a small, practical space with a bedroll thick enough to be the most comfortable thing she had slept on in weeks. Mara was awake beside her, making the quiet, exploratory sounds she made before deciding whether or not to cry, and June gathered her close and lay still for a moment, listening to the camp. Something was different. The voices outside were controlled but urgent. Boots moved in double time. A horse was being saddled quickly. She could hear the metallic rhythm of buckles being worked with speed. She rose, wrapped Mara against her chest, and stepped outside. The clearing was still dim, the fire reduced to glowing coals, the pine canopy above filtering the early light into thin gray shafts. Rowan stood at the center of the camp with 2 guards, speaking in low, rapid sentences and pointing toward the southern tree line. When he saw June emerge from the tent, he crossed to her immediately. "They moved in the night," he said, without preamble. "The Draven riders. They left the Greyvale Road and came north through the forest. They're approximately 2 miles out." June felt the cold move through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. "They tracked me." "They tracked your scent," Rowan said. His voice was flat and factual, the way he seemed to prefer. "You've been walking this territory for 4 days. The trail would be clear to any trained beta." He paused. "They know you're here. Then I need to leave," June said immediately. "If I'm not in the camp when they arrive—" "You're not leaving," said a voice behind her. She turned. Valen stood at the entrance of the large tent, already fully armored, his black fur cloak clasped and his bracers buckled. He looked as though he had not slept, or had not needed to. The same steady, collected presence as the night before, except that there was something sharper in him now, a readiness that had moved from potential to actual. "If you leave this camp," he said, walking toward her, "you are on open ground. They will reach you before you reach the next shelter." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. "You are under royal protection. That means something." "It means they have to stop at the camp boundary," June said. "It doesn't mean they will." "No," Valen said. "It means that if they don't, they answer to me." The way he said it was not a boast. It was a statement of consequence, plain and without decoration. the way a man states a fact about the weather or the distance between 2 points. And somehow that was the most frightening version of confidence she had ever encountered, not because it threatened her, but because she believed it completely. Rowan appeared at Valen's shoulder. "My lord, I need a decision on positioning." Valen held June's gaze for one more second. Something passed through those gray eyes. Not reassurance exactly, but acknowledgement. "I see where you are. I am not going to pretend this is simple." Then he turned to Rowan. "Full formation at the southern perimeter. No weapons drawn unless I give the word." He glanced back at June. "Take her and the child to the center tent. Senna stays with them." "I don't need," June began. "June." He said her name once, quietly. "Let me handle this." She had spent 5 years handling everything herself. She had walked 4 days on a broken arm rather than ask for help. Every instinct she had built from the wreckage of her old life was screaming at her to refuse, to move, to trust no one. But she looked at Mara's face, and she was quiet. "All right," she said. She heard the riders arrive from inside the tent. She heard the horses first, the particular heavy rhythm of war horses moving in formation, deliberate and slow, the sound of animals trained to be weapons, then voices, and the silence of Valen's guard answering them, and then one voice rising above the rest that she recognized so immediately and so viscerally that her hand tightened involuntarily on Mara's back. Aldrich. Even at this distance, even muffled by tent canvas and pine trees, she knew the particular cadence of that voice, the way it moved between command and complaint, never fully one or the other, always performing for whatever audience it imagined was watching. Senna, seated beside her, said nothing, but her hand moved to her satchel and rested there, and her jaw was set. June listened. She could not make out every word. Fragments only, carried on the cold morning air. Property of House Draven. Legal claim. The child is pack-born. And then Valen's voice. Lower, steadier, and carrying with it a quality that silenced Aldrich's mid-sentence the way a hand laid flat on a drum stops the sound entirely. She couldn't hear what he said. She heard the result. A long silence. Then Aldrich's voice again, shorter now, and with something in it that she had never heard before. A note of recalibration. The sound of a man who had arrived expecting one kind of conversation and found himself in a different one entirely. Then boots on frozen earth, moving away. Senna exhaled through her nose. "Good," she said, to no one in particular. June did not move for another long minute. She sat with Mara in her lap, her good hand pressed flat against her daughter's chest, feeling the small, steady heartbeat beneath her palm. The morning light through the tent canvas had shifted from gray to pale gold, and somewhere above the pines, a bird had begun to call. A clean, clear sound that the cold air carried perfectly. When Valen entered the tent, he did not look like a man who had just turned away 12 armed riders. He looked like a man who had done something routine and was already thinking past it. But he stopped in front of her, and he looked at her face, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "He's gone?" she asked. "He's gone." A pause. "He won't come back. Not onto King's Road territory." "What did you say to him?" Valen looked at her steadily. "I reminded him that a rejection dissolves all pack claims, including claims to offspring, unless those claims are formally registered with the Royal Council within 30 days of the rejection." He paused. His 30 days ended 2 weeks ago. June stared at him. "He has no legal claim to Mara," Valen said. "He never registered one. Which means she is yours, entirely and under full royal law, with no outstanding challenge." The words landed slowly, the way important things do. Not all at once, but in layers, each one settling before the next arrived. June had known, in theory, that the law existed. She had not known it applied. She had not known the deadline had passed. She had been too frightened and too exhausted and too busy surviving to sit down and count 30 days from the moment her world had ended. Her throat tightened. She looked down at Mara, who was watching Valen with those wide, serious eyes, one fist wrapped around the edge of June's sleeve. "You knew that last night," June said quietly, "when I told you what happened." "Yes," Valen said. "You could have told me then." "You needed sleep more than you needed law," he said simply. It was such an unexpectedly human thing to say that something in June's chest cracked open. Not painfully, but the way a window cracks open in spring, letting in air that you hadn't realized was missing. She pressed her lips together. She would not cry in front of this man. She had not cried in 5 weeks, and she was not going to start now. In a tent in the middle of a pine forest, in front of the Alpha King, who had apparently spent the night preparing to dismantle her former mate's legal claims while she slept. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. Then Rowan appeared at the tent entrance, and behind him, to June's complete surprise, was a face she recognized. A woman, perhaps 30, with close-cropped dark hair and a warrior's build and a scar across her chin that June knew well. She stood at the tent entrance in traveling clothes, plain wool, no pack sigil, and she was looking at June with an expression that had collapsed all the way from careful composure into something raw. "Nara," June breathed. Her sister, her older sister, who had stayed behind when June fled, who had sent a single unsigned note 2 weeks ago through a traveling merchant. "I know you're alive. I'm looking." Her sister, who was standing in the Alpha King's camp in the middle of the highland forest, with pine needles on her boots and red-rimmed eyes that she was refusing to acknowledge. "You're an idiot," Nara said, in a voice that was shaking badly for someone who clearly intended it to be steady. "You walked 4 days with a broken arm and didn't send word to—" She stopped. Her gaze dropped to Mara. Her whole face changed. "She's gotten bigger," she said softly. "She has," June said. Nara crossed the tent in 4 strides, and June stood, and they held each other the way people hold each other when the relief is so large it needs both of them to contain it. And Mara was sandwiched between them, making an indignant sound at being squeezed. And Senna made a quiet noise and stepped tactfully out of the tent, and Rowan followed, and June heard, in the brief moment before she stopped paying attention to anything except her sister's arms around her, the Alpha King quietly follow them both out, giving her this. Just this. Later, when Mara was sleeping again, and Nara was warming her hands by the rebuilt fire, and telling June in low, furious, loving detail everything that had happened in the Draven pack after her departure, June looked across the clearing at Valen. He was standing at the map table, speaking with Rowan, one hand braced on the table's edge, studying the marked routes with that focused, unhurried attention he gave to everything. The morning light had strengthened, and it fell across his shoulders, and the dark braids of his hair and the old scar on his cheekbone, and he looked exactly like what he was. A man carrying the weight of a territory, doing it without performance or complaint. As if sensing her attention, he looked up. Their eyes met across the clearing. He held her gaze for a moment, and then the corner of his mouth moved. Not a full smile, nothing so unguarded as that, but a small, real shift that changed his whole face for just a second before it settled back into its careful stillness. June looked away first. Her heart was doing something she did not have words for yet, and she was not ready to have words for it. But she looked back. She couldn't help it. She looked back, and he was still watching her, and the morning light was gold between the pines, and Mara breathed against her neck, and Nara was talking about escape routes and pack law and where they could go next, and underneath all of it, quiet as a current beneath cold water, something in June had shifted. Something that had been broken for 5 weeks. Not her arm, not her pride. Something deeper and less nameable had moved. Just slightly. Just enough. 3 months passed like the turning of a long, slow page. Valen did not ask her to stay. He offered it, once clearly without pressure or expectation, the same way he offered everything, as a fact laid on a table, to be taken or left. There was a position in the royal healer's household for a woman with Senna's recommendation. There was a cottage on the keep grounds, small but solid, with a hearth that drew well and a window that faced east. There was space and safety, and no obligation attached to either. June said yes. Not because she was afraid, not because she had nowhere else to go. She had Nara now, and Nara had already found footing in a northern pack village 2 days' ride away. She said yes because the cottage had a window that faced east, and she had always wanted that, and because Senna turned out to be the finest teacher she had ever encountered, and because Mara laughed, her first real laugh, in the keep's great hall when one of the stable cats walked across the hearthrug, and the sound of it echoed off the stone walls, and Valen had looked up from his papers across the room with an expression so unguarded that June had felt something split open in her chest like light through a cracked door. It was not fast. Nothing real ever is. Rowan remained suspicious of her for 6 more weeks and then abruptly stopped, with no explanation, and began instead to teach her how to read the territorial maps. A gift so practical and so entirely in keeping with his character that it made her laugh. He never acknowledged either the suspicion or its ending. She never brought it up. Senna taught her the names and properties of every herb in the highland, which plants drew fever down, and which closed wounds and which, taken in the right measure, helped a mother's body recover from the particular violence of being a mother. She taught her to read the scent of infection before it became visible, and to set a bone cleanly, and to be present with people in pain without absorbing that pain as her own. June was good at it. Better than she had expected. She had spent 5 years making herself small, and it turned out that the attention she had been putting into that was better used noticing other people. Mara walked for the first time on a cold morning in January, taking 3 unsteady steps across the cottage floor toward the low stool where June was sitting, and falling into her arms with a triumphant sound. June held her and pressed her face into her daughter's soft hair and let herself cry. Properly, finally, all the way through. For everything that had brought them here. For the broken arm, and the cold road, and the 4 days of walking, and the moment she had stood at the top of a highland ridge and found, against all probability, that someone was looking back. Valen told her about his own loss on a night in February, when the snow had come down thick and the fire in the keep's study was the only warm thing in a white and silent world. He told her without decoration. A mate, 7 years ago, before he had taken the crown. A fever that the healers had not caught in time. A grief that had settled into him and become, over years, the particular quality of stillness she had mistaken at first for coldness. He told her. And then he was quiet, and June sat beside him on the stone bench by the window and did not try to fill the silence with comfort. Because she understood now that some things did not need to be filled. They needed to be witnessed. After a while, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. He held it carefully, the way he did everything, with full attention, without performance. She turned her hand over and held his back. Outside, the snow fell on the pines and the keep walls and the long highland road that stretched away into the dark, and inside the study the fire breathed, and Mara slept safely 2 floors up, and the world was quiet, in the way that only comes when something that has been broken for a long time, finally, gently, begins to close. They were bonded in the spring, in the keep's stone courtyard, with Senna and Rowan and Nara as witnesses, and Mara on Nara's hip, watching the proceedings with the grave attention she brought to everything she did not yet understand. It was a small ceremony. Valen had offered her a larger one, a formal royal bonding with the assembled packs, and all the ceremony the crown required. She had looked at him across the cottage table and said simply, "No." He had nodded. Small then. When it was done, Rowan made a sound that was not quite a cough, and looked at the sky with great interest. Nara held Mara up and said, "Wave," and Mara waved one unsteady hand at no one in particular, and then grabbed Nara's braid and pulled. Valen looked at June with those gray eyes that had looked at her for the first time on a cold highland ridge, across wind and yellowed grass, and the vast indifferent distance between a king and a woman with a broken arm and everything to lose. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and there was nothing left between them that either of them was hiding. "All right," he asked. Yes, she said. And she meant it the way she had not meant a word in years, completely, cleanly, with nothing underneath it that contradicted it. Yes. Aldrich was brought before the Royal Council 4 months later, on charges of abandonment and illegal coercion of an Omega under pack law. The case was presented by the Council's own advocates, drawn from evidence gathered quietly and thoroughly by Rowan over the preceding months, in the methodical, relentless way Rowan did everything. Aldrich lost his beta title. He lost his standing in the Draven pack. The pack alpha, faced with the full weight of royal scrutiny, did not come to his cousin's defense. June was not present at the hearing. She had been asked if she wanted to attend, and she had considered it. And then she had looked out her east-facing window at the morning light on the keep grounds and thought about all the hours she had spent, in the last year, building something new, learning Senna's herbs, reading Rowan's maps, watching Mara discover the world one unsteady step at a time, sitting beside Valen in the quiet study while snow fell outside. And she had thought, no, that belongs to the past, and the past does not get any more of my days. She heard the outcome from Rowan, who delivered it in the same tone he used to report weather conditions. Done, he said. Good, she said. He nodded and left, and she went back to the herb table where Senna was waiting. Mara grew up knowing her worth was not negotiable. She grew up in a keep full of maps and books and the smell of pine smoke and herbs, with a mother who had walked through the cold with a broken arm to bring her somewhere safe, and a man who had looked at them both on a highland ridge and decided, without being asked, that no one should have to carry that alone. She grew up knowing the story. Not the hard parts. Not yet. Not until she was old enough to understand them. But the shape of it. The road, and the riders, and the fire. And the morning when the snow had finally stopped, and the world had opened up like a hand unclenching. She grew up knowing that the world could be unkind, and that people could fail you, and that none of that was the whole story. The whole story included the moment when someone unexpected looked across the distance and did not look away. That was the part worth keeping. That was the part June held on to, on cold mornings when the old ache in her healed arm reminded her of everything she had carried, and the east window filled with light, and Valen's hand found hers across the breakfast table, without either of them needing to say a word. That was enough. That was everything.